Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. Over the last several years, there has been perhaps an unprecedented effort in this country to bring attention to the deep and growing problem of alcohol abuse. Many states, including Idaho, have passed within the last few years tough new drunk driving laws. Many states have at least considered raising the drinking age, and now all states will be under federal pressure to increase the drinking age to 21, Idaho included. Those efforts, as significant as they might be, do little really to address the alcohol abuse problems of the estimated 10 to 12,000 adolescents in this state who right now have some problems with alcohol abuse. Few with any knowledge of this problem of teenage drinking doubt that the problem is anything but on the increase. The question is, are we as a society doing as much as we could be doing to deal with the problem? It's a question we ask tonight as we look at the subject of teenage alcoholism. We'll put the question first tonight to Ed Burns, the Director of Substance Abuse for the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare in Boise. Mr. Burns, before I ask you that question, if we're doing enough, let me ask you for some parameters of how serious this problem of teenage drinking is.
Well, Mark, as you pointed out, we feel that Idaho really is no worse than any other particular state in the country, having roughly somewhere between 7 to 10% of its adolescent population troubled with alcohol or other substances, estimating to 10 to 12,000 as you pointed out. In terms of what we are doing at this point, in the last 2 years we've seen some 1,300 adolescents under the age of 18 in our treatment centers around the state, mostly in outpatient counseling services. That is almost 10% of the total population that we saw in treatment during those same 2 years. We're seeing adolescents in approximately the same number in treatment as one would guesstimate their percentage in the population is with trouble. Some of the statistics that we had from fiscal year 1983 indicated that we saw kids between the ages of 6 all the way to 18. We did some file reviews on some of those younger children and found out that a few were in therapy because of problems of their parents having an impact directly on them. But in fact, some of the younger kids were involved with inhalants and alcohol and other substances. We see it as a problem that is one that we're just going to have to get a better handle on, that we're devoting resources to. But given the whole picture of funding in the state and the resources available, we feel we have a lot more that we could possibly do.
Let me make some sort of a summary statement here then. The problem is getting bigger.
It would appear that all indications are kids are using alcohol a lot more now than they have been other substances.
And they're doing it younger.
And there's indications that the age is dropping.
And are we reaching anywhere approaching most of the children who have this problem who, in other words, we're not helping very many of them, are we, through treatment programs or whatever?
No, not from the data that I've been able to collect from our treatment system.
Okay, let me ask you the tough question, I suppose. Why are these things happening? You mentioned that maybe a youngster is impacted because his parents have some problem. What are the other causes?
Well, first of all, there's some pretty good national data now that children of alcoholics have a high risk of developing an alcohol or substance abuse problem themselves. In fact, they're 4 to 6 times more likely of developing that particular problem. I think that alcohol and other substances are things that kids tend to use through peer pressure, etc. It is an activity that's engaged in not because of its social consequences, which is one of the major reasons why adults use alcohol, but because of thrill-seeking or peer pressure or other kinds of things. And the rest of it we can only guess at.
Let me ask you finally then the question that I started with. I take it from your comments that you would answer the question, no, we're not doing enough to deal with the problem. But is it a matter of money, or is it something more than that?
Well, I think, Mark, is probably a combination of a number of different things, at least in my estimation. We're attempting to do some really exciting things with the resources we have available. We now have contracts in all areas of the state to do an education program for young children whose parents have an alcohol or substance abuse problem. We know they're high risk, and we hope that if we can explain to them some information about alcoholism and substance abuse and the fact that they're at high risk, we may be able to impact their potential behavior. Secondly, we have started a learning unit that has been taught now in about 80% of the 6th grades in the state of Idaho, a learning unit dealing with alcohol and drugs that presents 15 lessons, about 7.5 hours of classroom instruction to 6th grade kids about alcohol and substances and ways they can say no as a possible way to decrease their use in later years, in junior and senior high. We have outpatient contractors in all 7 areas of the state now through the Department of Health and Welfare. That provides at least one focus for providing treatment for those adolescents. We could be certainly doing a lot more.
We'll come back to some of those points, I promise, later on. Thank you. Let's get another view of all of this now from a person who sees the teenage alcoholism problem at a somewhat different level. Deborah Batten is a special education teacher at Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello. Ms. Batten joins us tonight in Pocatello. Do you agree with Mr. Burns' assessment of the depth of this problem?
Yes, I do. I firmly believe that we are seeing an increase in alcoholism or problem drinkers or potential problems within our school. I think that because of some of the new discipline policies and because of stricter law enforcement, a lot of it has gone underground, and we're not seeing as much in the schools, but the kids still talk, and you still see it in the evenings on the parking lots of certain stores in town where the hangouts are, and you see it at the dances, particularly when we have afternoon dances. We'll always have a percentage of kids that try to come in who have been drinking or who leave the dance and drink. It's there, we're just, they're finding different ways to hide it.
What generally are schools, this is a tough question to ask a teacher, but generally are schools doing enough to either educate the children or to, frankly, to diagnose them, if you will, once they have a problem?
As long as I've been teaching, I have not had anyone train me as to how to identify, and I have never been given any information as far as give this to your kids, but I know that it is being handled within our school district on a small scale. As I talked to several administrators and many teachers before doing this, the basic feeling that I got from them was, I don't know really of very much being done, and what they felt was being done, they felt was inadequate. They felt that they were unaware of how to properly identify a problem drinker or a child who was having problems with substance abuse, and they felt that once they had identified that there was really nothing that they could do as far as helping them. They felt like their hands were tied.
In fact, I had someone tell me today that in many cases the youngster was diagnosed, rather than having a drinking problem perhaps, was diagnosed as just being a bad kid, being a truant, whatever. Is that a problem?
Well, in our district now, on the first offense for alcohol, they are referred to the District Discipline Review Committee, and the law enforcement comes in, and the kid is commonly referred to as a jerk. Not by everyone, I'm not saying that, but that is the common term. And you'll see a whole pattern of other problems. As a special ed teacher, I particularly see these problems because one of the first things that you see happen is their grades start slipping and they start showing some learning disabilities or signs of learning disabilities, and I end up being the one that tests them. And I'll test out kids that are being sent to alternate programs for schooling or who are going before the district review committee who test out 12th grade 9th month, and they might be in the 7th or 8th grade. And there certainly are not learning disabilities there, but because of their drinking, there's other problems experienced. But still, they're considered a bad kid, a jerk, someone who just doesn't care. And never once do we say, is this a problem of alcohol or substance abuse?
Right. Tell me again now what you're doing once you identify a youngster with a problem.
At this point, when a child is sent or a student is sent to DDRC, which is the District Review Committee, on this offense, they are referred to Road to Recovery, which is Southeastern Idaho alcohol recovery program, and they're encouraged to attend 4 to 6 weeks of classes. It is suggested, they cannot mandatorily make them, but it is suggested that they do this. After they've done this, there's no follow-up.
Why not?
Because it just hasn't been set up within our district at this point. As we have attended this adolescent alcohol abuse conference, I think one of the things that we have targeted as our main goal is to somehow, especially within our junior high, set up a program whereby we can intervene, we can come up with some follow-up for these kids, because they do return to our classrooms and they still need the help. The problem is still existing, but there isn't anything. And so I think that one of our main goals, and something that we would like to see happen, is that we follow through and give them the help that they need when they return, so that it doesn't become a continued problem.
It sounds as though you see a problem with education both of the kids and of the people who are working with the kids. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. Who's dropping the ball there?
Well, it's really hard to point fingers, because everyone that I've talked to that is in charge of these things feels like they're doing something. For instance, one of the things that they implemented into our school district a few years ago was the self-esteem program, and they felt like if they could build the child's self-esteem, and especially at an early age, that they wouldn't feel the need to make the decision to use alcohol and especially become an abuser. And they feel like that is a successful program, and they right now are on the level where they see making the child aware that this is what can happen is effective, but that's not reaching everyone, and there's kids that have had this problem before these programs have gone into effect, and they are the abusers and they're the ones with the problem, but there's nothing being done for them. But the administrators sometimes don't really see that, the people that are in charge of implementing these programs.
Right. Well, we'll come back in a moment. Thank you. A final view now from a former alcohol counselor who is now working with school teachers and counselors to help them recognize teenage alcohol problems. Lynn Hopper is with Intermountain Hospital, a private psychiatric hospital in Boise that operates a program for teenagers with drug and alcohol problems. How much difficulty is there in educating the teachers and the counselors to recognize the seriousness of the problem?
As far as the difficulty in educating them, I don't think that's difficult at all. I think virtually all of them identify there is something there. But as Deborah stated, they've never had any formal training what to look for. The other thing is that everybody's always seen the discipline problem, the kid that's overactive, and under the guise that a child is going from being a young child into the terrible teens, sometimes the behavior that the kids are, starting to use is just ignored as, he's just being a teenager. But I think it would be very simple to get started with some of the counselors, especially the teachers, on a basic education program of identification, which could lead to the identification that the child is getting into some controlled substances, alcohol being one of them for them.
Well, it seems obvious that ought to be done. Why isn't it done?
I don't know, being a straight answer. I think there's a lot of districts that don't have the funding, or would say they don't have the funding. A lot of them don't perceive that as being their responsibility, in that they feel it as a responsibility of the parents to deal with these kinds of issues. I think sometimes, too many times, we look at the school districts or expect the school districts to be the surrogate parent And I think sometimes that's not their responsibility, that sometimes the responsibility starts at home. And a lot of the parents that I see are not even aware that their kids are even involved in doing these things. There's a lot of spare time after school, lunch periods. Sometimes the kids just take off truant-wise and start utilizing it on a small basis. I think the identification is really where it's a combination responsibility. It's a responsibility of parents to start working on education. It's a responsibility, I think, of the school districts to start allowing some of their teachers, especially the counselors, to learn how to identify. How do you diagnose an adolescent? How do you separate the kid who is acting like a jerk? How do you separate, how do you identify that behavior as being, the cause being alcoholism, and how much just behavioral teenageism?
Well, how much, you seem to be pointing at the old chicken and the egg argument
Exactly.
here of who's responsible for what. The fact is that the kids are obviously doing this. There are lots of youngsters with problems. Well, let me ask about what, if it's not the parents who are not doing it and it's not the school, somewhere somebody has to make a decision as to what happens to these kids. You get referrals for these types of youngsters. What sort of programs do you put them into?
We have, the hospital that I work for has a specific inpatient program, residential program, where the kids come in and they go into a structured behavioral environment. We approach it from the point of view that the kids need to learn an alternative lifestyle. The kids are into a lifestyle that's not functional, and they need to learn how to make choices. They need to learn how to be responsible for their behavior, and they need to learn how to make good decisions. And through this process, then you get into the educational process. What's alcohol doing to your body? What's cocaine doing to your body? Because we started seeing an awful lot of kids, a lot of kids that are using alcohol are not just using that. Lots of times they're using what's available. And that goes the full gamut, all the way from simple beer all the way through heroin. So it's a combination.
Well, on that point, let me open it up, and I want to go back for just a moment before we go to some of the things that maybe we should be doing that we're not doing. But I want to go back for just a moment to the cause of this problem, and let me go to Ms. Batten and Pocatello first. You heard Mr. Burns say earlier that peer pressure contributes. Obviously, it does. If you have a drinking parent, I suppose that contributes. What other sort of things contribute to the increase of this problem?
Well, I think the accessibility, for one thing, has a lot to do with it. And if you talk to any of the students who you know are using it, and I have students who have come to me in confidence and told me that they were using alcohol, I say, where do you get it? Oh, you can get it anywhere. Well, where's anywhere? Well, we're getting it from kids in the high school who obviously are getting it from someone else. But today, for instance, in my 7th hour, I set math aside and decided that we'd have a little discussion on substance abuse and alcohol abuse, and we were talking about this program. And I asked them, where did you get your first drink? Where's this coming from? Well, I got it at home. Every one of my students that were in that hour had taken their first drink at home, and they were getting their alcohol from their parents' home. That's where they're getting it. Why they are doing it, I think, relates back to so many different things. Each one is so individual. I see kids that are really the thrill seekers whose friends, they've happened to fall into a group of friends who are using it, and it's a very popular thing to do what your friends are doing, especially at the junior high level, and that peer pressure is just critical to their feeling of self-worth and self-esteem, and they use it for those reasons. I don't see very many kids that I'm dealing with that are using it as escape. I don't see that as the prime cause right now.
Well, let me ask you this. If the youngsters are getting the alcohol from their parents, from their own homes, do the parents not know about that, or is it a process of denying that it's going on?
Well, I think that the kids are very clever, and they learn how to play the games. And I know one student said that his father had found the beer cans out in the garbage in back of the house 2 or 3 days later, but hadn't missed them at first. And I think when both parents are drinking, that it's easy to go undetected because, well, she must have drank them. You know, and it probably never occurred to the parent the first or second time it happens, where did my beer go, or where did the alcohol go that was in the cupboard? I don't think that at that point there is the level of awareness. Once they've become caught, then for sure there's some monitoring of where the alcohol's going.
The argument, Mr. Burns, go ahead.
And I was going to say, you know, if kids are using hard liquor or something like that, it's very easy to fill the bottle back up with water, or, you know, strain a little bit of tea in it, or you know, whatever the case might be. It can be easily hid when it's being gotten from home.
I want to ask you about one particularly hot political issue at the moment, that's raising the drinking age. Idaho's going to obviously be under pressure to do that because of some federal mandate for highway money. Will that affect this problem one way or the other?
Well, the State Substance Abuse Advisory Council, meeting in conjunction with the workshop that was recently held in Pocatello, went on record again supporting the increased drinking age. There's pretty clear evidence that I think in Idaho some 4 or 5 young fatalities will cease. It won't happen next year if that legislation is passed. Other states, there's been a pretty significant decline in young fatalities as a result of having an increased drinking age. I don't know what will happen in terms of the availability of alcohol among junior or senior high kids. Some people will claim that kids will get it regardless. I think my own personal view is that if it's a little bit less accessible, it may not quite filter as broadly as perhaps it has. I don't know, but I have no statistics that would indicate that, except from what we see and hear.
Mr. Hopper, do you have a thought on that, about raising the drinking age? Would it impact this one way or the other?
My own personal opinion is no. I don't think it will. I think I agree with that. It'll make it more difficult to get, but knowing adolescents.
But if you're willing to fill up the bourbon bottle
That's
with a
what I'm
little
saying.
strained tea, you'll probably go to whatever lengths necessary to get
Exactly.
to drink. Right?
You know, those that want to do it, they'll find a way.
Ms. Batten, a thought on that, on the drinking age?
I feel like as far as driving and drinking, I think that they're more responsible at an older age, and I would personally like to see the drinking age raised, but I am in agreement with the other men that for sure, if they want it, they'll find a way to get it. But we have to do everything we can to try and help it, and that seems to have been a viable solution in other states.
Well, let me go back to this, the point of what perhaps we could be doing in the schools, or with teachers or with students. Mr. Burns, do you have some additional thoughts on that, about what specific kind of recommendations you might make to school districts to address this problem better?
Well, I think as Deborah pointed out, there perhaps has not been an awful lot of instruction given either counselors or perhaps teachers in terms of what to look for in terms of adolescent substance abuse. And frankly, I really don't think that it's a huge budgetary problem. What it takes is a little bit of release time or some motivation to find out what's going on in terms of some of the significant signs. I think Lynn pointed out some of the things that that happens, you know, with kids. Deborah too, in terms of deteriorating grades, problems in other areas of their life that with just a little bit of awareness can be easily identified as a potential substance abuse problem.
So a little effort would go potentially a long way.
I think a little effort and a little bit of either guided resource or learning or whatever would probably address a significant portion of just identification. From there, I think probably the bigger thing we have to hassle with is the system. Once a child has been identified with a problem, from there, how do you move that child and that family unit ultimately into some kind of professional treatment service? There's a lot of denial that happens around alcohol and substance abuse problems, I think both with adults as well as adolescents. Some families, schools, and just about anybody else you want to name can get wrapped up in that. But I think once you've identified that a kid has a problem, their grades are slipping, or they're truant, or other areas of their lives are impacted, then the real trick is just to get them right on into some kind of treatment program.
Mr. Hopper, I see you shaking your head in agreement.
Yeah, I think the problem, again, like Ed is saying, has to be approached on two prongs. One, we have to deal with the kids that are already involved. The other, we have to go into a prevention mode, which hopefully through education with the younger kids and some of the programs that Ed's doing will really help defray any of the kids getting involved in it. I know my kids come back and they are now starting about the negatives of drugs, the negatives of smoking, the negatives of drinking,
Right.
and being responsible, which is great for the younger kids. If the teachers will be aware of falling asleep, falling grades, the little innuendos that start telling you that the kid's already into using pretty good, that gets spread into the counselor. The counselor can then spread that over into talking with mom and dad, and then if they're trained in the issue of identification, but also what are their resources? How can they get that family unit, as Ed says, over to professional help as soon as possible? Then that way we're going to get a much better handle on it.
Ms. Batten, how much denial is there at the, if you will, the school board or the superintendent or the principal level that there is a problem in almost every school with this?
I'm ashamed of this because as I interviewed from principal to administrator, I had such a varied response as it is non-existent in my school. I don't think it really does exist, but I'm finding beer cans all over, and I guess it must be a problem somewhere. I think that in our community especially there is a tremendous amount of denial going on, and as I was speaking with one person today, he said, we have a problem. It's stupid to hide it. We're only hurting ourselves by hiding it further. And it seems like we have the ostrich effect here, that if we put our heads in the sand and ignore it, it's going to go away, or at least we won't have to deal with it. And I feel that one of the first steps to correcting any problem, as we've all been taught, is to accept that we have a problem. And as a community, we need to be more aware of the problem that we do have and be willing to take action.
Right. Well, Mr. Burns, I'll give you the last word on that. It seems like there's a denial problem for the person who has a problem with alcohol, but maybe a denial problem for those people who are in a position to help the youngsters.
I think that there is some system denial that happens, wherever people are. There may be some resistance just to admit, out of fear of not knowing perhaps what to do. We have resources that exist in just about every community in the state of Idaho to both treat as well as to intervene, and with, as I mentioned, the Children of Alcoholics Education Program, the 6th grade learning unit, we have some tremendous education tools also.
Well, gentlemen, we thank you for being here. Mr. Burns, Mr. Hopper, thank you. Ms. Batten and Pocatello, we appreciate your being with us tonight.
Thank you.
That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.